one of life's biggest challenges, the loss of a loved one. And during this, the financial stress and the decision fatigue that you can experience can be very tough to navigate. I know we've helped many clients, unfortunately, navigate the loss of a loved one. If the surviving spouse was like, I'm not sure what we have, where it is, we can reverse audit and look at bank statements to look at, okay, where were payments going? And so how do we clean up the chaos and turn it into a system that works for them for the rest of their lives? Maybe you're gonna be too emotional to process stuff and do something in 5 years, but our take is education and empowerment so you can make the proper decision. Once ready, just rebuild the financial plan. If you're a young family, like, it's not ever too early to think about this. If you're married with kids, it becomes essential.
I think the easy starting point, but I'd say immediate action items, is
losing a spouse or loved one is going to put your world upside down. And during this, the financial stress and the decision fatigue that you can experience can be very tough to navigate. So this podcast episode is meant to help you navigate the unknowns, especially if your spouse or partner or loved one was the one handling the finances, to help you essentially lower your decision fatigue and give you a guideline of what needs to be accomplished right away versus, what should wait for a couple months as far as any big financial decisions go. Well, Chris, I know we've helped many clients, unfortunately, navigate the loss of a loved one. A lot of the cases, the person that passed was the main financial person in the relationship. Like, they were the ones. So I'm going to go through, really 2 examples of what to do. What does it look like if things were set up in advance? And the reason for this is if sometimes the loss of a loved one, it's not a sudden thing. It's a sickness, for example, a cancer that's drawn out, and unfortunately, sometimes the probabilities are against your favor. So it's kind of lining up things to make sure that the surviving spouse will be okay. And then some of our clients have become a client after the death of, we did not work with either spouse before, and they've come to us after the fact. And, sometimes things are very unorganized. And so how do we clean up the chaos and turn it into a system that works for them for the rest of their lives? So let's talk about first about how to set up in advance. Like, if we know in advance, what is a simple checklist of things that we're looking to accomplish to make sure the transition is easy for the non-financial partner?
Yeah, I think the simplest one, and it should be obvious, but again, we've seen instances where accounts are everywhere. So I think just having a clean personal financial statement, just a simple balance sheet, like where's the money at now, just so you have your bearings of, versus trying to call 10 different 800 numbers because you have old statements from 10, 15 years ago that you're digging up. And, so I think just having a clear snapshot of here's what's in place, here's where it's held, Fidelity, Vanguard, whatever, and just simple balance info.
To further that point, I would be looking at, if we had like a couple months in advance and they had the appetite to do this, we'd look to consolidate all assets to one custodian in advance. If you do this in advance, you need both spouse signatures, if it's joint accounts, and then you're dealing with one custodian after, so you're not dealing with 10 different companies. And if you wait till after, you need to have a death certificate for every single company, and that can be very emotional in itself. If you get everything into one custodian, and you make sure the titling is either in joint name or there's direct beneficiaries, because sometimes people uncover they have an ex-spouse or they have someone that wasn't intended. And it doesn't matter what your will says. If you have a direct beneficiary in something, the money has to legally go to that person, even if it's an ex-spouse or someone that you didn't intend to go to. So we would do an audit of their entire balance sheet. We do a consolidation of their entire balance sheet. And then we would do a detailed audit of titling and beneficiaries. If you have the titling and the beneficiaries correct, you can avoid probate altogether and keep the court system out of your estate. And if you have other physical assets, you can set up even a revocable trust could be, let's say the spouse wants some of the money or their kids if they're on a second marriage, and some of the spouse, some of the kids, a revocable trust can help, navigate the wishes of the person that's passing, unfortunately, and make sure all the goals are reached after.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
Then I would make sure to go through and make sure that the non-finance spouse, I don't know how else to better put that, we have we do a budget. We make sure the taxes are are filed. We look at any opportunity where they have a married filing joint tax return. I believe they get it that year. So if the spouse passes in June, they still get to file as married filing jointly that year. And then is it head of household the next year? I know we just looked at this for a recent client.
Qualifying widow.
Qualifying widow.
Yeah.
Which is a similar tax structure.
Yeah, a little
same
bit more
thing.
friendly than the
Single.
To that point, I don't know if you want to get into this now. There's also, if you don't intend on staying in your house, there's a special rule for the gain on a property. So say you bought your house back in the 80s or something and it's appreciated significantly. If you're filing a joint return, there's a bigger runway that you can exclude from the gain on a sale than single. But that extends out for 2 calendar years, 2 tax years. So you can still get that higher exclusion. It's, I believe, 550 versus 2, or 500 versus 250.
Yeah. So that's a really important point. If you bought a house for $500,000, you're selling it for $1 million. You have that 2 years after. If you're going to be like, I don't need this much house if it's just me, my kids are gone, my spouse just passed, all $500,000 is tax free. Versus if you wait 2 years and 1 day, you're going to get 250 of that tax free. Though the 250 gets taxed. If you're at a, 23.8% capital gain rate plus a 3% state tax, man, that's, $60-some thousand of money you're handing over to the IRS. There are some decisions from a tax perspective that you have to look at the timing, what tax bracket you're in, your primary home. It can make sense to make some decisions. You're going to have time. Like, you don't need to make the decision that month, but you're going to have, some guidelines of timelines that are going to make a lot of sense tax-wise for you to do. And you should really be, sometimes maybe you're going to be too emotional to make that in 2 years. And it's more important to process stuff and do something in 5 years. But our take is education, and empowerment, so you can make the proper decision. Okay, what else will we do in advance? I would think, like, if the one spouse is passing a large qualified account, because like you said, the next year they get the qualifying widow, the year after that they go to a single tax filing status. And so let's say one spouse passes, a $3 million traditional IRA or a 401k that's pre-tax, and they're in the 75 and the required distribution has started, that single person now has half the tax bracket to work through. So they're going to hit 10, 12, 22, 24, then 32. And so what was coming out at under the 24% or lower bracket where they were married is now coming out, a large portion of it's now coming out at 32 hypothetically. And so their tax bracket has jumped 8% on that excess. Their Medicare, the IRMA charges have jumped up because now that's the brackets get cut in half. So there's a significant widow penalty as far as the IRMA charges go, the tax filing status, how RMDs are treated. So they want to consider some Roth conversions. The year that the spouse is still alive, so it's married filing jointly, the year of death, and then the year after death. We want to fill up certain brackets in preparation. Yeah. Anything else you can think of in the advanced scenario?
No, aside from, like how you said, checking account titling, just getting, if you completed an estate plan, making sure that's all current too. But that's pretty much the only other thing I could think of.
So let's talk about if someone had just met us after nothing was planned for in advance. We're planning from scratch. So now it's a widow. Unfortunately, what are some of the basic steps that we need to take? Yeah. And what should be acted on immediately? And what would you say, let's take 3 to 12 months in some cases before we make any big decisions?
Yeah, I think the easy starting point is just looking at the last joint tax return, because that's going to show the full picture. It's going to have all the, like, the paper trail of where, like, if you had a brokerage account, it's some random custodian, it's going to get a 1099 that would be, so that can kind of show.
It's like a forensic audit.
Yeah, right. So here's where everything was being reported from.
She or he may not even know.
Yeah.
What was there. Especially if it was a heart attack or it was an unexpected thing, the surviving spouse may not know what they have together. So that's a good starting point for sure.
Yeah. There's even websites that you can search through the state, like if there's unclaimed property. That's not really going to be an immediate. That's more so if years go by.
Yeah.
There is a database that you can kind of search for accounts that have been lost by the wayside. But I'd say immediate action items is review the return, see where things were coming from, and then start to build that sheet of, like, here's where everything's at and here's where we want to get it to.
Sometimes there's been life insurance policies that are paid up that you don't know about. So those websites can be beneficial. Sometimes if the client's receiving an annuity payment, a lot of times, like we had a client that came to us at a MetLife policy. We're like, well, they may have other policies. So we called with the client on the line, found out they had a life insurance policy, and it was a paid up policy. But these insurance companies aren't necessarily going to volunteer. They're going to find out and stop the payments. If they find out the death, they're not going to necessarily volunteer. There was actually lawsuits years ago on that. But we need to make sure we track down any insurance policy, do the tax audit. We would do a bank account audit. If the surviving spouse was like literally came in and acted like clueless, we would, as far as like, guys, my spouse did all the finances. I'm not sure what we have, where it is. We can reverse audit and look at bank statements to look at, okay, where were payments going? MetLife or Prudential had an insurance payment going to it. Then we know, we call them. From the taxes, we can see any reportable. If they're taking distributions out of an IRA, we can find it that way. It can be 1099-R. If there's brokerage accounts, we would know that from a 1099 forms on the tax return. So, and then as far as like other things, we'd work with Social Security to notify, because if they were married for 10 years or longer, let's say the spouse that passed was getting $3,000 a month from Social Security and the spouse was getting $2,000 a month. Well, you can go claim and stop the 2 and get the 3. So you don't get both anymore, but you get the higher of the 2. So just little things like that we'd want to make sure on the checklist. And basically we're going to need account statements, we're going to need death certificates, and a copy of your will and estate planning documents, and then we'll be able to tackle this stuff very, very efficiently.
Yeah.
Anything else that you'd say?
No, that's it. I think that the big thing is just getting our arms wrapped around like what's in place right now and starting to clean, get things back to a manageable spot.
Yeah. And then I would say once ready, so this may be 3 months, this may be 6 months, this may be 12 months for some. The surviving spouse, we want to redo their estate plan.
Yeah.
Right. So we'd want to look at, okay, where do you want your money if something happens to you?
Yeah.
Kids, if it's a second marriage, maybe some of the money went to a trust, they're taken care of. So now you're worried about your biological kids. There's all these considerations. So we want to redo your estate plan, will, power of attorneys, who's going to make the decisions for you. If you become incapacitated, healthcare, financial, durable, we'll want to most likely have a revocable trust if you're a super high net worth, probably an irrevocable trust if some of the money's not already in there.
Yeah.
Once you're ready, just go through the estate planning process. And I would say the next logical step. So initially, we're going to want to make sure right off the get-go, we'll do a quick budget. Like, what are your monthly needs? Get assets consolidated. Make sure that we have a tax-efficient distribution strategy. But then we'd recommend after at this point, once ready, just rebuild the financial plan.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? So walk us through, how we would do that.
Yeah. So we, just take it back to square one. Like we always want to assign a job description for the portfolio, and that I'm sure the needs are going to change. So we want to go through first step at a new budget. Like, what's your cash flow need? And then reverse engineer the rest of the plan around what we're trying to achieve from whether it's a monthly income standpoint or annual expenses, whatever it is. As those needs change due to the new circumstance, we want to make sure that the portfolio does too.
No question. And sometimes we've seen like there'll be a drastic philosophy difference. Like maybe let's pick on the husbands for a second. The husband, because females typically live longer than males anyway. So I don't know the percentage wise. I want to say like 80% of our clients that are widows are females, right?
Yeah.
Because they typically live longer. So typically the husbands are like the cheap ones, like convincing the spouse, like we can only spend, $10,000 a month between our Social Security and portfolio, and really they could spend like 15. Yeah. So sometimes we see the surviving spouse will drastically change. They're like, you know what, we funded our kids' college.
Right.
I want to start enjoying this because I wasn't really, he
Yeah.
handled the money before. So we'll help educate them. Like, what's the artwork of like, okay, you still have some legacy goals. You want to stay financially secure. We don't know how long you're going to live.
Yeah.
But we can also ratchet up your lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so, I'm thinking of like 3 examples in my head where we've seen after a loss, after 12 months, we've essentially doubled the lifestyle of from before.
You mentioned something about the estate plan that I wanted to go back to.
Yeah.
So there was one instance where we started working with somebody after their husband passed, and it's relevant in the higher net worth, planning space, but portability wasn't elected on the
Mhm.
deceased, whenever they closed their estate.
Yeah.
So that was something that the surviving spouse is set to be over the estate limits. And if you go over those limits, it's very severe. That means that your estate is high enough. Right now, the limit's what, 14 million?
15.
So 15 million.
15 rounded. Yep.
So if you're a single person and your gross estate's 20 million and that exemption's 15, that means you're 5 million over. There's a flat 40% estate tax that's applied. And so that estate exemption of 15, it's for both spouses. But if you don't elect that when closing out the decedent's estate, that 15 goes away. So the
Do you have
single,
a time frame you can go back and grab it though?
yeah. So in this instance, we went back retroactively. I can check while we're talking here to see if there's a timeline. I think you can open the estate.
And get it.
Yeah.
There's definitely a deadline.
I'm sure they're
but
probably, yeah.
yeah.
But that allowed us to go and grab another 15 million of a credit. Now that number could change as tax code changes, but now
You got double the exemption.
yeah. So now if we freeze it, if she's expected to pass with 20 million, before she had an exemption of 15, she would be 5 million over. Now she has 30 where she's safe. So that's huge. Like if that's missed, it could literally be millions of taxes that go,
Yeah.
go out the door.
Absolutely.
But
Yep. No question. Well, I would say, one other key thing, if you're a younger family and you've seen this happen, unfortunately, with parents or grandparents, we hear very good examples of like they had their ducks in a row. Grandma and grandpa had everything. It was planned. There was a legacy plan. It was a pleasant surprise, and it was so easy. And we've seen the opposite of nightmare, where it's like basically it's someone's full-time job to get their parents' estate closed out. It takes
right.
12 months to do it because of all the business interests and real estate and all these titling. You have to look at post-nups or prenups, and everything was just kind of chaotic.
Yeah.
So if you're a young family, like it's not ever too early to think about this. If you're married, let alone if you're married with kids, it becomes essential. So just, asking the question, like if something happens to me and I'm the breadwinner, if I'm like, a financial contributor, which even if you're a stay-at-home spouse, like you're still a huge financial contributor because the cost of daycare or child support is huge. And so just making sure and will my family still be able to live a similar lifestyle, not like a better situation, but like a similar lifestyle if I pass? And do we have the structure of estate planning document set up to make sure that that's able to happen smoothly and there's no creditors, predators, the family can continue the daily temperature and the financial temperature on a rhythm, while navigating, one of life's biggest challenges, which is the loss of a loved one.
Yeah, for sure. Anybody good. It's good to have your estate plan in order, but definitely if you have kids, a business, if you have properties in multiple states, like those are all like you need to have an estate plan for those.
Yep.
If not, that somebody's going to go through the probate process and it's going to make that loss way worse.
No
Now you have
question.
attorneys, you have court, like you have so many different people involved that like that could have all been avoided.
Absolutely.
But
Well, thanks for joining us, Chris, and we'll catch everyone next week.